Mit ein Toches kann man nicht tanzen auf zwei Chasanas, says the old Yiddish proverb. You can't dance at two weddings with one tuchus. You can't be in two places at once. Of late, I've been uncertain where to be. Thursday morning, I returned from Israel, my second visit since Hamas's brutal assault, and a part of me remains there, more of me each time I go. And yet during my visit with a group from our congregation, another part of me felt I should be here. American Jewry is also in distress. Monday, New York's Jewish community endured yet another anti-Israel demonstration, this one targeting prominent city hospitals, protesters echoing the charge of genocide leveled in the International Court of Justice. I wanted to face down myself this perverse accusation against a nation victimized by a terrorist enterprise with genocide in its charter. But I was grateful to return to Israel. I last visited in November when the wounds of October 7th were still raw. The trauma endures, of course, but back then the Israelis I encountered appeared in shock, visibly stunned, even bewildered, as one would expect in the immediate aftermath of such horror. 2 months later, the people we met could be more reflective, able now to take stock of all that has transpired and consider what lies ahead. We met with Knesset and other public officials who wrestled aloud with questions of government accountability, the lack of preparedness for the attack, resulting, some claimed, from the divisions sown by the proposed judicial overhaul. According to recent polling, a strong majority of Israelis feel Prime Minister Netanyahu should leave office after the war concludes. He has not articulated a vision for what comes next in Gaza, his horizon extending only as far as the fighting. And many of the families of the remaining hostages, and apparently some in his own war cabinet, feel that the Prime Minister has prioritized the fighting over negotiating the captives' safe return. We bore witness to Israel's extraordinary civic spirit, meeting heroic volunteers from multiple sectors of society, tending to the material and psychological needs of Israelis most painfully hurt by Hamas, offering what the government remains unequipped to provide. And of course, we visited with family of hostages and those who lived through the attacks on kibbutzim in the Gaza envelope. I could share all of these moving encounters, but I will speak of just one. Our conversation with a young husband and father, I'll call him Ariel, we met in the community of Ashalim, south of Beersheba, about 45 minutes from Gaza. The story of Ashalim is too common in Israel today. The town has taken in 60 families displaced after October 7th. And Ariel's story is also too common, though not, thank God, as tragic as some. Last August, he, his wife, and 2 children joined kibbutz Nir Yitzchak, a thriving, growing community on the Gaza border where they moved to build a life. Of the risks living so close to Gaza, Ariel explained, "We knew there was a chance we would face occasional rocket fire, but we also knew how to handle it." What occurred on October 7th, though, was beyond their imagination. That morning, their younger son had awakened his father around 6. Then at 6:30, Ariel heard the familiar sound of the Iron Dome detonating a Hamas rocket. The family went to their bomb shelter, as they had done before. After an hour of continued explosions, they prepared to pack their car and head south, assuming this was just another volley of fire that would last a few days and then stop. But then they began to receive videos on WhatsApp of Hamas terrorists in Sderot, at another kibbutz, and then one even closer. Finally, at 9, they learned that terrorists were inside Nir Yitzchak. Gunfire was close by now, and this young father, an experienced military veteran, was afraid like he'd never been before. There's a new Hebrew phrase, the battle for the doorknob. It refers to Israelis hiding inside their bomb shelters, attempting to prevent terrorists from entering. Bomb shelters are not built with doors that lock. Who would need them? So Ariel blocked the door with furniture, and there his family remained until 10 o'clock that night when the army finally regained control of the kibbutz. The next day, Ariel's family and the other survivors of Nir Yitzchak, where 6 were killed and 5 taken hostage, were sent to Eilat. There, the government put them up in one of the resort hotels, which may sound exotic, but a hotel room is no place for a family of 4 to live for 2 months. Neither parent could work. There was no space adequate for the children to play, and of course, there was no school. Still, they managed. Then, a month ago, the family decided it was time to find a place to reclaim a more normal life. And so, with the financial support of the government, they moved to Ashalim, where the town embraced them, providing them a house and the goods to start over. Ariel related the journey of the last 3 months quietly and thoughtfully. He spoke of his friends who had been murdered, of how much he wanted to be fighting in Gaza but knew his place was with his family. He explained how he had been raised on Israel's political left to believe that peace with the Palestinians living in their own state, side by side with Israel, was not only possible, but necessary for both people's futures. But that now he was less convinced of that possibility, certainly in the near term. If he sounded disillusioned, he was also, he said, being realistic. While it is clear and tragic that thousands of innocents have died in Gaza, Ariel concluded, there are also a lot of people there glad for our deaths here. Will he return home to kibbutz Nir Yitzchak? We think about it, he answered, but we're not sure. The modern Zionist enterprise was undertaken more than 100 years ago, specifically so that Jews would be safe in their homes and never again be uprooted. So the fact that more than 200,000 Israelis have been internally displaced since the war began is especially jarring to the Israeli psyche. I offer the story of this one family who thankfully did not suffer on October 7th the way others did. None of them were taken captive, none of them killed. Because this story is therefore perhaps easier to digest as a single but all too common frame in the larger picture. It is difficult and presumptuous for those of us who live an ocean away to feel like we have a clear understanding of what has transpired in Israel and what Israel should do next. We all view with alarm the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. We mourn every innocent life lost, and there have been so many. But let's not forget, Hamas placed them in harm's way as shielding. If Hamas cared anything for the Palestinian people, its operatives would come out of their tunnels and surrender. Instead, they are like the Pharaoh in this week's Torah portion, who hides in his palace, refusing to give up, even as God sends plague after plague upon the Egyptian people until all of Egypt lies in ruin. To insist, like the protesters marching past the hospitals last Monday, that Israel must halt its campaign before Hamas is sufficiently incapacitated, which it is not because it is still firing rockets, is to ask that Israel continue to live with a threat on its border that endangers every Israeli and leaves large swaths of a small country uninhabitable. It also represents a failure to grasp that Israel's elimination of that threat is necessary to deter the much more dangerous Hezbollah. And it betrays an insensitivity to the depth of the wound inflicted on October 7th and the trauma through which Israelis have been living ever since. Years ago, I asked an Israeli colleague of mine during another, less deadly flare in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict how I should respond when Americans challenged Israel's defiance in the face of Western pressure to stand down. "Tell them it's complicated," he said. Most people you'll speak with won't want to hear that. They'll want easier answers and a side to blame. And looking at the mounting death toll in Gaza, Israel will be the easy target. But it is complicated. And to grasp that complexity, it does help to see it up close, to be there.